Now this is AK Interactive's Still Water from their Diorama series, and it's interesting stuff, as I found out when I made a video a while ago testing it out. But one of the comments on that video by Chris Granger 83 about using it to make ice effects. Now that really sparked my imagination. Now it sounds good, but does it actually work? What sort of effects can you easily achieve? Well, I decided to find out. Now this stuff is a 1-part acrylic liquid gel, which is a lot simpler to use than 2-part resins, and it can be great for making small amounts of water effects. It can be a little temperamental, and it does not always behave as you might expect. So if you have not seen it yet, then I would suggest watching the first video I did on this. The link is down in the description, so you know or have a better idea what to expect when you're using it. So looking back at the footage, I know I just said that this stuff can be temperamental, but despite all the previous testing, it still managed to surprise me. So make sure you watch this one all the way through to the end, as this is an interesting one. So after you've seen how they all came out, then let me know what you think down in the comments. For those that work, which effect is your favourite, and what ideas do you have using these effects in your projects? Now if you do like the look of this, or in the bits of kit that I use, then I've put some links down in the description. Anyway, back to the tests. So to test this one out, I'm going to use milk carton lids again. Now one reason is that they can show what is scalable. So whether you're making bases of tabletop minis or a diorama, you can see how things behave and adapt the principles to your own project. Also using milk cartons like this, for one, makes them near identical test pieces for a fair experiment, but also my kids go through milk like it's on tap. Therefore I have loads of these around that I can use and not worry about trashing them. So to get them ready as test pieces, first I prime them with grey Tamiya surface primer. Then for speed, I used my airbrush to spray Vallejo Model Air Black as a solid base coat. Now next, to make what I hope will be a nice deep icy colour, I then spray Vallejo Model Air Deep Sky over the top, and then mix in a few drops of Vallejo Model Air White to create a nice lighter blue. They look pretty good already. Okay, so let's start trying a few things out using the AK Interactive Still Water. Now this stuff is meant to be self-leveling, and from when I've tested it before, it is quite runny. So the first thing I want to test is how it behaves when I pour it onto the lid top. Will it hold its shape? Will it just go where I want it? Or will it just flow off the edge of the top onto my work surface? So squeezing some onto the top, I carefully use an old brush to encourage it to the edge without it spilling over. Right now it is sitting in quite a nice convex shape, which could look quite nice if it dries like that. Okay, let's put that to one side, and I'm not going to touch it at all and see how it turns out. Next I want to see how it looks with a much deeper set. So taking some masking tape, I placed that around the edge to create a wall to hopefully keep the gel in place so we get a nice deep ice effect. Now remember, this is the first time I've tried all of these tests. I've not tried them out before off camera to make sure I get it right perfectly for you first time. Where's the fun in that? But I am not entirely convinced that this is going to work, as those little ridges around the rim of the milk lids might make it hard to get a decent seal. But let's see what happens. First I pour in a little, which will hopefully seal up any gaps, before pouring in the gel up to a couple of millimeters deep. Now, according to the instructions on the bottle, you can go up to 3 millimeters deep in one pour, but from previous testing we found that takes ages to dry. So as it is not particularly hot at the moment, I reckon this will take 2 to 3 days to set at least. Okay, so having put that to one side, I have a third option I want to test. So let's do the straight pour again and gently encourage it to the edge. Now often when it comes to ice effects, both on dioramas and ice-themed tabletop mini bases, you'll see people using technical snow effect paint, and multiple brands have their own version of this. But today I want to test out this. This is AK Interactive's Ice Sparkles, which is also from their diorama range. Now when you open up the tub, it looks like caster sugar, although I would not recommend getting it mixed up and spooning it into your coffee. But sprinkling it over the wet water effect gel, it does give a slight frosting effect, which is quite nice, but it is very subtle. However, After leaving it for a few minutes so that a skin has started to form on the water effect gel, the ice sparkles stick to the surface, but do not sink into it, which gives it a much stronger effect. Okay, let's leave that one to dry overnight and see how that looks. The next day I came back to it, and when I looked across at the one with tape around it, it has drained all over my worktop. Okay, I refuse to be beaten on this, so to seal the edge I poured a little PVA glue to seal the edge and then re-poured back to that 2mm depth. Okay, so while that is drying, let's look at the other ones. So this is the first one we did with the neat straight pour. Okay, while it has not poured off the edge, it has self-leveled extremely well, and we have lost that convex shape. It almost looks like a thick coat of gloss varnish than a water effect, but I do have some more ideas and we're going to come back to that in a bit. Okay, this is more interesting. This is a second one with a straight pour again, but then we added the AK Interactive Ice Sparkles. Yeah, that's not a bad start. Okay, so going back to the first one, let's add a bit of a frosting effect by using a fine sanding pad. Starting light and then slowly building up the friction, and that doesn't look too bad. Okay, in the original comment that I mentioned earlier, one of the really interesting ideas was waiting until it dried and then adding superglue to make it look more icy. So let's give that a go. And having let that dry, it's not a bad effect. I must admit, it is not what I was expecting. I wonder if a light dry brush of white will help exaggerate that effect. But that's also given me an idea. What if we build up the edges with superglue first to create a slight well to contain the still water effect gel? Thankfully, I have a spare test piece to hand, so let's give that a go. This is interesting. It is holding a much more convex shape in this pour. You see a lot less of that auto leveling effect. You can also see it reacting with the superglue. The moisture in the gel is making the superglue dry and crystallize a lot quicker. I've just had an idea. I have no idea if this is going to work, but I wonder what will happen if we add the superglue to the water effect gel whilst it's still wet. Now, that deep filled test piece is still wet, so let's try it on that. Whoa. Okay, that's cool. I'm going to rewind the video here and do that again. Slightly speed that up so you can see that working. That is very cool. Okay, and then maybe add a few ice sprinkles. Okay, so after leaving it overnight, it is still a bit squidgy, so I have to resist the urge to keep testing it and then leave it alone. Okay, so while that is drying, and before we look at the others, let's look at some pros and cons to using AK Interactive Still Water to make ice effects for your models. Now, these are my initial thoughts, but let me know your thoughts and ideas down in the comments. So, is AK Interactive Still Water great for ice effects? Well, I guess it depends really on what you're looking for. But in general, first let's look at some of the cons. Now, if you're pouring AK Interactive Still Water to any depth, it takes ages to dry. This is not a product for the impatient. It does not give you a hard result. For example, this is one of the test pieces from that original video, and there's still some elasticity to it. This does mean that it has some flex, so it may not snap like some more brittle resins might, which you might consider a positive point. But it does mean that you can't score it with a knife, carve it or sand, or polish it. Another con in this context is that it's very runny, which means even as an acrylic, it does auto level very, very well, which makes building up texture or depth without something to hold it in much more complicated. But being fair to it, at the same time, this stuff is formulated to create still water effect, so a nice level finish is exactly what it's designed to create. Okay, so on to the pros. What are the positives? Well, having a one-part product does make life a lot easier than trying to mix up resin. It also means you use exactly what you need, so you're going to waste less. Also, what is very nice is that you can tint this gel with any colour you like. So you could add a white or a light blue, for example. But also how it reacts with superglue to make that really nice kind of frosting effect is really cool. And I wasn't expecting that. Now, just be aware though that playing with this technique is you're going to go through a lot of super glue. But it's a nice effect though. Now, even just looking over at the test pieces whilst they're drying, now with a little creativity you can create some very nice and different effects. So from that perspective, it really does depend on what you're looking for. Okay, so I've now left the deep fill test piece for 3 days. Now this looks very interesting. The super glue dropped into that wet gel has given a really interesting effect. But what is slightly concerning though is that it appears to have fractured a little. I suspect that might be from where I could not resist gently squeezing it to see if it's set. But let's take off the tape and see what we have. Yeah, okay, a very cool effect, but it has fractured a lot. Now, to be fair, I had not de-tacked the tape before I used it, and also then stuck the PVA glue to it, which then is not going to help. The mix of tape and the PVA has taken all the paint off the plastic lid as well, so I guess I'm lucky it did not take everything with it. Although it might have needed a little more curing time, as you can see there, it's not fully stuck to the base. Now, at first glance, it looks like a bit of a disaster, but once again, I'm not going to be beaten by this. So let's see if a little super glue will stabilise that and rescue this example. Okay, so now everything has dried, let's look at the 4 test pieces and see what we got. Hold on, let me swap out to the close-up lens so you can see what I mean here. So this is the first one we tried. This was the straight pour of neat AK Interactive still water, gently spreading it to the edges with an old brush. That gave a very flat, shiny finish. So I added some more texture with super glue onto the dry water effect, and then gave it a slight frosting with a sanding block and a light dry brush. Overall, this approach gives quite a flat and matte result, but the base colours we started with are still showing through quite nicely. This is the second one, once again, which had the same treatment as the last one, but in this one I added AK Interactive ice sparkles once the gel had started to dry. I must admit I am genuinely quite impressed with the effect the ice sparkles give and how it lifts that previous example that little bit more. Now this is the third one where I used the super glue to make a well for the neat water effect gel and simply added some of those ice sparkles once it started to dry. Once again, a very different result. Now finally, this is the one that surprised me the most. This is the one where I added some super glue to the wet gel and then added some AK ice sprinkles once it had started to dry. Yes, it fractured when I took off the tape, which could have been for a number or a combination of a number of reasons, but adding super glue into the cracks has stabilised it really nicely. So that one is a bit of a happy accident. Also, what I quite like with this is that dropping the ice sparkles into the wet gel as well, and it's sunk down a little bit, has added a bit more of a sparkle, a shimmer to the wet gel, not just that frosting on the surface. Now, if you enjoyed this or learned something new, then please hit the like button and check Flying Raven Studios out on Patreon and help me to keep making more videos like this. And I will see you on the next project.